My name is Elena Cross, 33 years old, the forgotten middle child of the Cross family, the dynasty behind Charleston's maritime software empire, Crossport Systems. Every Thanksgiving, I return to our sprawling estate on James Island. Spanish moss draped the live oaks like lace veils, and the salt air clung to the verandas as if the ocean itself had taken up residence in our home. It looked like something out of a glossy southern living spread. The white-columned house gleaming against the tidal marsh, the manicured gardens meticulously trimmed by a small army of groundskeepers. Yet this year, as I climbed the marble steps, a strange energy pulsed through the house. From the foyer, I glimpsed my father, Victor, hunched in his study, phone pressed to his ear, whispering with the intensity of a man who had cornered fate itself. His other hand tapped the desk, restless, hungry. My mother, Celeste, hovered nearby with her habitual grace, but I noticed the tightness in her smile, the glass of Chardonnay trembling just slightly in her hand. They thought I had come home to sit at the long mahogany table like always, to take my place at the far end, to nod and smile while Victor announced his triumphs and my siblings basked in the glow of inherited glory. But they were wrong. What none of them knew, not my father with his empire, not Bennett with his yacht and lazy charm, not Sloane with her endless stream of filters and followers, was that beneath my simple black dress beat the heart of someone they had misjudged for too long. The bombshell my father was preparing to drop would indeed change our family forever, but not in the way he thought. If you are watching this from within your own family business, if you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, drop a comment below and subscribe. You'll want to hear how I turned my father's betrayal into the sweetest revenge, one that reshaped not just a company, but an entire legacy. I grew up in Charleston, where old money met salt air, and where the Cross estate had stood for nearly a century. From the outside, we were a portrait of Southern success. Sprawling verandas, dinner parties with senators, a lineage steeped in wealth and tradition. But behind those shuttered windows, the air was heavy with unspoken hierarchies. My grandfather, Thomas Cross, was the exception. He was no aristocrat by birth, but a dock worker with grease under his nails and brilliance in his mind. In the 1,970 seconds, he built the first version of Crossport in a shed by the shipyard, an inventory management program that revolutionized how ports tracked containers. He turned grit into gold, code into empire. By the time he died, every harbor along the eastern seaboard used Crossport systems. When my father, Victor, took over in the early 90s, he transformed that modest success into a titan of coastal logistics. Under his reign, Crossport ballooned into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, a darling of Charleston business circles. At galas and regattas, his name was spoken with awe. And he made sure his children knew it. There were 3 of us, each cast into roles before we could protest. My older brother, Bennett, at 39, was the golden boy, sloppy yet adored. He had majored in communications at Duke, surfed through college on Daddy's donations, and still waltzed into an executive position at Crossport the moment he graduated. Bennett spent more time on his sailboat than in the office, but Victor never cared. In his eyes, Bennett was heir apparent. Then came me, Elena. At 33, I was always the overlooked one, the bookish middle child. Unlike Bennett or Sloane, I inherited my grandfather's hunger for technology. At 12, I taught myself to code on an aging Dell. At 15, I built a small scheduling app for a marina that still used it years later. I graduated near the top of my class from Georgia Tech with a dual degree in computer science and business. I had real ideas, ways to modernize Crossport's aging infrastructure. But to Victor, I was invisible. Finally, there was Sloane, 28, our family's carefully curated ornament. With hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers, she was Charleston's influencer darling. Her feeds were flooded with soft focus shots of magnolia blossoms, yacht parties, and branded perfumes. She had no interest in the business that funded her lifestyle, yet she never missed a chance to market herself as crossport royalty. And my mother? Celeste played her role with the polished detachment of Charleston high society. She kept the peace, hosting luncheons, smoothing Victor's sharp edges in public. But when it came to his dismissal of me, she simply refilled her glass and whispered, "Elena, let it go. It's not worth the fight." But it was. It was worth everything. I had watched too many dinners where my father's gaze skipped over me to land on Bennett's empty boasts. Too many boardroom conversations where Randall Pike, his COO, smirked as Victor brushed me aside. Too many moments when my ideas, my hard work were dismissed as sweet or idealistic, unworthy of serious consideration. The breaking point came 10 years ago. I was 23, fresh out of Georgia Tech, armed with a proposal that could have redefined Crossport's future, a cloud-native integration system that would have placed us years ahead of the competition. I spent months building the case market research, technical architecture, cost-benefit models. The day of the board meeting, I wore my best suit, clutched my laptop like armor, and walked into that paneled room filled with Victor's cronies, men who had played golf with him for decades, men who had never built a single line of code, but wielded power like it was their birthright. 10 minutes into my presentation, my father raised his hand. The dismissal was sharp, public, final. "Elena, darling, this is clever," he said with a patronizing smile. "But it's not practical for serious business. Our clients value stability, not experiments." Laughter rippled around the table. Randall Pike leaned back in his chair, smirk curling his lips. "Now," Victor said, turning to the board, "shall we return to real business?" My heart had burned with humiliation as I packed up my slides. In that moment, I realized I would never have a place at his table. That night I made a vow. I would leave Charleston. I would build something of my own. And when the time came, I would return not as the overlooked daughter, but as the storm that would upend the Cross dynasty. I left Charleston before dawn the next morning. The marsh fog clung to the bridge rails as my car hummed across the Cooper River, carrying me away from the city that had raised me but refused to see me. My savings amounted to just over $6,000, scraped together from tutoring, side-coding jobs, and a summer internship that paid more in experience than in wages. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Savannah, Georgia, became my refuge. It didn't have the same gleaming boardrooms or high society galas as Charleston, but it pulsed with creativity. Artists, entrepreneurs, misfits. It was a city where outsiders reinvented themselves. I rented a one-room loft above an old shrimp cannery. The floors tilted. The pipes moaned whenever the neighbors showered. But it was cheap, and it had just enough space for a folding desk, a mattress on the floor, and the second-hand computer I'd dragged from home. That's where I became E. Vale. The name wasn't random. E for Elena, of course, but Vale came from the word's old meaning valley, refuge. I wanted my new identity to be a sanctuary from the Cross name. No one could dismiss me if no one knew who I was. I started with freelance coding jobs, grinding through endless bug fixes and integration projects for small startups. I learned fast, delivered faster, and built a reputation as someone who could make ancient systems talk to shiny new platforms. Every dollar I didn't need for rent or ramen went back into my work. The breakthrough came when I developed a relay engine, a piece of middleware that could bridge ports' outdated systems from the 1,980 seconds with modern cloud APIs. It wasn't glamorous, but it solved a billion-dollar headache for every logistics company still shackled to legacy infrastructure. I called the company Aurelia Labs. Quiet, unassuming, but golden in its promise. I wasn't alone for long. Priya Desai, my neighbor from across the hall, was another transplant, an MBA dropout with an instinct for strategy sharper than any professor's. We met over paper-thin walls, her blasting late-night Hindi pop songs while I coded until sunrise. One evening, she knocked on my door holding takeout and said, "If you're going to build an empire in there, at least let me handle the boring parts." Priya became my COO, my confidant, and in many ways, the sister I wished I had. She fronted the company at industry mixers while I stayed in the shadows. When Aurelia began to grow, she became the public face, letting Vale remain a mystery. Reporters speculated endlessly. Some said Vale was an eccentric European investor. Others claimed he was a retired government coder. No one guessed the truth. For the first 3 years, life was brutal. I survived on microwaved noodles, working 80-hour weeks, praying rent checks wouldn't bounce. But Aurelia grew. By year 4, we had a real office in Savannah's historic district, exposed brick and all. By year 6, we employed 40 people. By year 8, we were valued at $220 million. And through it all, my family had no idea. When I flew home for the occasional holiday, I played the part of the struggling daughter. Still figuring things out, I'd say when Victor asked about work, though he rarely pressed for details. He assumed I was barely afloat, tinkering on projects too trivial for his notice. That suited me perfectly, because while I smiled politely at Thanksgiving dinners, I was quietly mapping the battlefield. Crossport, my father's empire, was cracking. Their systems hadn't kept pace with the industry. Competitors were eating their market share. And Randall Pike, ever the sycophant, was quietly burying unfavorable audits while drawing obscene bonuses. That's when I made my move. Aurelia began acquiring stakes in the very companies that supplied crossport vendors, contractors, even a few key clients. Piece by piece, I positioned us as the inevitable solution to their decline. Then, a year ago, I sent an olive branch. A partnership proposal disguised through intermediaries, the Heron Pact. It offered capital, modernization, and a way to preserve the crossport name. Victor rejected it outright. Randall whispered that it was a vulture fund's trick, and my father's pride did the rest. I remember hanging up the phone with Priya, her voice sharp with frustration. "You gave him a chance, Elena. He doesn't want help. He wants control." She was right. So I stopped offering help. I started preparing for conquest. By the time Crossport's board realized how deep they were sinking, Aurelia, through my proxy firm, Northbridge Capital Partners, was already positioned as the only viable buyer. The deal was clean, legal, and inevitable. All that remained was to watch Victor's face when he realized who held the pen. Which is why, 10 years after walking out of Charleston humiliated, I boarded a private charter back for Thanksgiving. I rarely indulged in such extravagance. I preferred commercial flights, even middle seats. But this time I wanted the contrast to sting. As the plane cut through the November sky, I reviewed the contracts again. Everything was in order. By the end of the holiday weekend, Crossport would belong to me. But the real prize wasn't the acquisition. It was the moment at that mahogany dining table, surrounded by silver candlesticks and fine china, when I would finally say the words, "Father, I am Northbridge." Charleston shimmered in late November light as the jet descended toward the private airfield. The marshes spread out like an emerald quilt, stitched with silver waterways. And in the distance, I could almost see the Cross Estate's white columns rising above the tidal flats. On the tarmac, a black Jaguar sedan waited, polished until it gleamed like obsidian. I rarely indulged in showmanship, but this was one of the few times optics mattered. My family was fluent in only one language status, and I intended to speak it fluently. The ride across James Island stirred memories I had buried for years. Summers spent chasing fireflies in the marsh grass. Christmases where the house glowed with candles in every window. Countless arguments in the dining room where my voice was drowned out by Victor's booming certainty. I felt the old ache stirring, but alongside it rose something harder, steadier, resolve. When the car rolled up the circular drive, I stepped out and let my heels click against the stone. The Cross Estate hadn't changed. Live oaks arched over the lawn like ancient guardians, their branches draped in moss. Wreaths already hung from the windows, and the air smelled faintly of pine and salt. The door opened before I knocked. My mother, Celeste, floated out in a cream silk blouse, her blonde hair in its signature chignon. Her eyes widened when she saw me, scanning the Cartier watch on my wrist, the tailored cut of my coat. "Elena, darling," she said, pulling me into a perfumed embrace. "You look different, prosperous." "Good to see you too, Mother," I replied, smiling politely. She ushered me inside, her tone light, but her gaze kept flicking over my outfit, the way people trained in old money did, recognizing the subtle markers of wealth without ever naming them. The house itself was frozen in time. The sweeping staircase, the chandeliers, the oil portraits of ancestors who looked down with stern approval. I half expected to hear my grandfather's laugh echoing down the hall. But he was gone, and in his place lingered only Victor's shadow. "Your father's in his study," Celeste said, lowering her voice. "Busy with some deal. Very hush, even with me." I smiled, the irony curling like smoke in my chest. "I'll say hello before I unpack." Victor's study had always been forbidden ground when I was a child, a sanctuary of leather chairs and cigar smoke, where decisions shaping fortunes were made. I knocked once more out of habit than respect, and stepped in without waiting for permission. He was at his desk, glasses perched on his nose, flipping through a folder thick with contracts. For a moment, he didn't even notice me. Then he looked up, surprise flickering across his face before hardening into his usual reserved composure. "Elena," he said, standing for a stiff embrace. "You made it." "The trip from Savannah was smooth," I answered. I didn't bother mentioning the jet. "Business is good." He gestured to the chair across from him, but I remained standing, scanning the papers on his desk. There it was bold on the cover sheet, the Northbridge Capital Partners acquisition proposal, Aurelia's logo discreetly stamped in the corner. My pulse quickened, though my face remained calm. Before I could comment, his phone rang. He answered quickly, back half-turned. "Yes, I understand. 50 million is final. Northbridge has been insistent. We'll conclude after the holiday." He hung up, shuffling the papers into a neat stack, clearly trying to shield them from my view. "Sorry, important business," he said. "Nothing you'd understand." The words might once have pierced me. Now they only confirmed how blind he still was. "Of course, Dad," I said smoothly. "I'll let you get back to it." Upstairs, my childhood bedroom had been preserved like a shrine. Debate trophies, science fair ribbons, even the faded banner from my Georgia Tech graduation. None of it had ever impressed Victor, yet my mother had kept it intact, as if waiting for the day I'd return as the girl I once was. But I wasn't that girl anymore. By late afternoon, the house filled with the clink of glasses and the hum of voices. Bennett lounged in the drawing room, scotch in hand, cheeks flushed already though it was only 3 o'clock. He had filled out around the middle, but carried himself with the lazy confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. Well, he said, raising his glass in mock salute. "The prodigal sister returns. Still playing with computers, are you?" "Something like that," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Before he could press, Sloane swept in, phone held at the perfect angle. "Elena's here?" she chirped, live-streaming her entrance. She kissed my cheeks, her perfume cloying. "You look expensive. Finally snag a rich boyfriend?" "No," I said flatly, "just working." She winked at her followers. "Hard work pays off, ladies. Remember that." Their banter washed over me, the same chorus of dismissal and vanity I'd grown up with. But this time, I wasn't the overlooked sister. I was the storm on the horizon, waiting for the perfect moment to break. From down the hall, Victor's voice rose, sharp with excitement. "Yes, absolutely. Tomorrow morning we sign." Sloane giggled into her phone, but my pulse steadied into something like anticipation. Thanksgiving dinner would not be the performance Victor expected. By the time dessert was served, nothing in the Cross family would ever be the same. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold, the marsh outside the windows sparkling with frost like a million tiny mirrors. The Cross estate had always looked its finest on holidays. Celeste orchestrated everything with military precision, fresh garlands wound around the staircase, ivory tapers gleaming in sterling holders, tables dressed in linens imported from France. She lived for these displays, as if perfection at the table could disguise the cracks beneath it. The house buzzed with preparations. Kitchen staff hurried past with trays of oysters and sweet potatoes. Sloane floated about in a sequined dress, narrating every detail for her followers. Daddy carving the turkey, another Cross tradition. She cooed into her camera, turning the family's tension into curated content. When we finally gathered in the dining room, it looked like a magazine spread, mahogany polished to a mirror, china edged in gold, an autumn centerpiece of pumpkins and crimson leaves. I noted my place setting clear at the far end, as always, farthest from Victor's throne at the head. It might once have stung. Now it only amused me. The meal began with ritual. For generations, each Cross had risen to declare what they were thankful for. It was meant to be a moment of gratitude, but in Victor's household, it had become little more than a competition of status. Bennett went first, raising his glass with a smirk. "I'm thankful for another strong quarter at Crossport." I nearly laughed. I knew their reports showed losses. And for the legacy, my new yacht. 42 feet of pure craftsmanship. She'll be racing come spring. He squeezed the hand of his girlfriend, a willowy blonde who giggled on cue. Sloane rose next, holding her phone at just the right angle. "I'm thankful for hitting 500,000 followers this year, for my partnership with Southern Luxe Cosmetics, and for the chance to represent the Cross brand on a global stage." She flashed a practiced smile toward Victor, who nodded as if proud, though I'd heard him scoff at her career countless times. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, letting the pause settle. "I'm thankful for lessons learned. That rejection can sometimes be a gift, that persistence matters more than privilege, and that the sweetest victories come to those who endure." I lifted my glass deliberately. "To finding your own way." A flicker of something crossed Victor's face, confusion, suspicion, but he masked it quickly and moved on. The courses came and went: oyster stew, roast turkey, cornbread dressing, pecan pie. Conversation swirled. Bennett, bragging about a client I knew Aurelia had actually steered his way. Sloane interrupting with comments from her live stream audience. Celeste pouring her third glass of wine, smiling too brightly. Victor, however, was distracted. Every few minutes he checked his phone under the table, his jaw tight, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He was waiting for the right moment. It came with dessert. He tapped his knife against his glass, the sound cutting through the chatter. The room fell silent, even Sloane lowering her phone. "I have an announcement," he said, standing with the gravity of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "One that affects all of us." He paused, savoring the anticipation. "As you know, I've devoted my life to building Crossport Systems into a leader in maritime technology. But all legacies must evolve. The time has come for change. I have decided to sell the company." The room erupted. Bennett choked on his wine. "What? You can't be serious." Sloane gasped theatrically. "But Daddy, my entire brand is built around Crossport." She cut herself off only long enough to reposition her phone, broadcasting every tearful syllable. Victor held up a hand. "The deal is nearly finalized. Tomorrow morning, we sign with Northbridge Capital Partners. $50 million, a generous sum given the market." Bennett slammed his fist on the table, rattling silverware. "You promised me 10 years at this company, and now you sell it out from under me?" Victor's face hardened. "Your mother and I will use part of the proceeds for retirement. The rest will establish the Cross Foundation to fund technology education. None will be passed directly as inheritance. Sloane's tears came in a flood, though she made sure her camera caught her best angle. That's our birthright. What happens to me? Celeste sipped her wine, eyes darting between us, desperate to smooth the storm she had no power to stop. I sat quietly through the chaos, cutting another bite of pecan pie, letting their fury crest and crash. At last, I set down my fork. I have just one question, I said, my voice calm, deliberate. The table stilled, every gaze snapping toward me. Who is the buyer? Victor straightened, his chest swelling with pride. A highly respected firm, Northbridge Capital Partners. They're paying above market value because they see potential others don't. I let a heartbeat pass. Then another. Finally, I smiled, folding my hands in my lap. Dad, I said softly, I am Northbridge. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to hold its breath. Bennett's face drained of color. Sloane froze, her phone trembling in her hand. Celeste's wineglass paused halfway to her lips. And Victor, my father, the man who had dismissed me all my life, stared at me as though I'd spoken in a language he couldn't comprehend. The room seemed to collapse inward, soundless and heavy. I could hear nothing but the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking out the seconds of disbelief. Victor's expression shifted in slow motion, first confusion, then dawning realization, then anger sparking like a storm cloud across his face. Bennett was the first to break. He shoved back his chair, knocking over his wineglass. Red spread across the linen like blood in water. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice raw. "You Northbridge? That's impossible." Sloane, still holding her phone though her hands shook, whispered breathlessly to her audience. "Oh my God, did you hear that? My sister just said she owns the company buying Crossport." Her mascara, streaked tears glistened on the live stream, already spinning our family implosion into content. Celeste set her wineglass down carefully, but her hand trembled. "Elena," she said quietly, almost pleading, "explain yourself." I stood slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of my words settle. 10 years ago, when my proposal was dismissed as impractical, I left this house and built something of my own. Aurelia Labs, under the name E. Vale. Victor's laugh was sharp, brittle. Ridiculous. Northbridge is run by Vale, a respected investor. Not my daughter playing at startups. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a sleek silver case. From it, I slid one of my cards across the table. Embossed in minimalist lettering, E. Vale founder and CEO, Aurelia Labs. Not ridiculous, I said. Undeniable. Victor snatched it up, staring as though the letters might rearrange themselves into something else. This is some kind of trick. Is it? I asked softly. Northbridge already owns controlling stakes in Mariner Systems, DocTech Solutions, and Harborline Logistics, your 3 largest vendors. And we hold majority interests in 2 of your biggest clients, including Seaward Distribution, all acquired legally, publicly. This deal is the final piece. Randall Pike, who had been silent until now, leaned forward from his seat at the far side of the table. His narrow eyes gleamed with contempt. "This borders on fraud," he sneered. "You manipulated this company from the shadows. It won't stand." "No," I said, my voice sharp as glass. "It's called market research. Every acquisition was above board, every share public. You know that as well as I do, Randall. Unless you'd like me to bring up the financial audits you buried last year." His smirk faltered. Victor's face darkened. "You expect me to believe you orchestrated this entire thing? That you've been plotting against your own family?" "Not against," I said firmly. "For survival, you ignored the warning signs. Crossport has been bleeding for years. Outdated systems, bloated management, 20% market share lost in just 3 years. I offered help anonymously, through the Heron Pact. You rejected it without reading. Recognition flashed in his eyes, a flicker of doubt that he crushed almost instantly. The Heron proposal? That was you? I nodded. One last chance for you to take my hand without knowing it was mine. You chose pride instead. Bennett pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice trembling with fury. You planned this. You wanted to humiliate us. On Thanksgiving of all days, just to make yourself look clever. No, I said evenly. I chose Thanksgiving because I knew everyone would be here. Because I remembered the Thanksgiving 10 years ago when Dad announced your promotion to vice president at this same table, while dismissing me as a child, playing with computers. I chose tonight because it's poetic justice. The words struck him like a blow. For once, Bennett had nothing to say. Sloane lowered her phone slowly, the reality dawning at last. So, you're our new boss? She asked in a small, uncharacteristically unfiltered voice. Technically, yes, I said. Though not with things as they are, the management structure will change. Victor slammed his fist on the table, making the crystal shiver. This deal is off. I will not sell my company to my daughter as part of some revenge plot. I shook my head. The contracts are already signed. The board has approved. At 9 a.m. tomorrow, the press release goes live. Legally, Crossport belongs to Aurelia. To me. You'll regret this, he spat. I'll fight you with every lawyer I've got. Your lawyers already signed off, I reminded him. They know this is the only lifeline left. Tell me, Dad, what will you say? That the brilliant CEO you've been negotiating with for months turns out to be your daughter? Silence stretched, taut as wire. Finally, Celeste spoke, her voice trembling but clear. All these years, she said, her gaze fixed on me. All these years we thought you were floundering. All those times you thought I couldn't afford to come home for Christmas, I said softly. I wasn't struggling, I was building, and I needed you all to keep underestimating me. Victor's face reddened, but his voice cracked with something raw. You have a choice, Elena. You can be my daughter, or you can be the woman who stole my company. You can't be both. Once, that ultimatum would have gutted me. Tonight, it only steeled me. You're wrong, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I've always been both, you just never chose to see it. The silence at the table grew unbearable, the air heavy with the scent of turkey gone cold and wax dripping from forgotten candles. My father's face was carved from granite. Bennett's jaw clenched in fury, Sloane's mascara-streaked cheeks glistened in the candlelight. Finally, Bennett broke the stillness. He shoved back his chair, pacing like a caged animal. You've destroyed everything, he hissed. You think you're clever, but you're just vindictive. You don't understand what it means to stay, to commit. I stood too, slowly, deliberately, never raising my voice. Stay? Bennett? You've stayed in the office only long enough to sign expense reports for yacht races and dinners at strip clubs. You want to talk about commitment? Commitment is building something from nothing, while eating ramen in a one-room loft, not draining a company dry for your indulgences. Color drained from his face, replaced by blotchy red. He sputtered, You, but I cut him off, my tone icy. I know about Mariner Tide Consulting, the fake vendor account, the phantom consulting fees routed to your offshore account. Nearly $300,000 skimmed. I have the records. I have the IP logs. I even know the passwords you used. The room froze again, this time with horror. Celeste's hand flew to her mouth. Sloane's phone slipped from her grip, clattering to the floor. Bennett lunged toward me, his voice breaking. You can't prove any of it. I already did, I said calmly. I didn't come here to press charges. Not yet. But the company will not shield you anymore. For a moment, his bravado cracked, fear flashing in his eyes. Then rage took over again. You'd ruin your own brother to feel powerful? I'd hold accountable a thief who happens to be my brother, I corrected. There's a difference. He stood there trembling, fists clenched, then spun on his heel and stormed out of the dining room. The door slammed so hard the chandelier shook. Sloane, ever the opportunist, dabbed at her cheeks and straightened in her chair. "Well," she said carefully, "if this is really happening, if you're the new head, then maybe I can help." I raised an eyebrow. "Help?" She nodded eagerly, eyes shining with calculation. "I've built an audience of 500,000 people who hang on my every word. Imagine what we could do together, me as the public face, the glamorous side of Aurelia. I can make you look human, relatable. The world loves a family redemption arc." I almost laughed at the audacity. "The face of a software integration platform? Do you hear yourself?" Her lips pressed into a pout. "Don't mock me, Elena. My skills are valuable. You built your empire in silence. I built mine in the spotlight. Different arenas, but still success. If you're smart, you'll use me." The naked ambition in her voice was so purely Sloane that I almost admired it. "We'll discuss it," I said finally. "But if you want a role in the company, it won't be decorative. No filters, no fake deals. You'll have to work." She flinched at the word work, but tried to mask it with a smile. "We'll see." As the staff began clearing the wreckage of dessert, Celeste reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. Her eyes, softened by years of avoidance, dulled by wine, looked startlingly clear. "All these years," she whispered, "I told myself keeping peace was my role. That standing by your father meant protecting this family. But I see now I was wrong. I should have stood by you." For a moment, the room blurred, my throat tightening with an ache I hadn't expected. I had armored myself against Victor's fury, Bennett's entitlement, Sloane's vanity. I hadn't prepared for my mother's quiet regret. "You could have spoken," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Just once, when he dismissed me. That's all I wanted." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was weak. I chose silence over courage. I'm sorry." The words pierced deeper than any accusation. I nodded slowly, unable to speak, and she withdrew her hand, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume. Victor rose abruptly, his chair scraping like a gunshot. His face was pale, his authority cracked but not yet broken. "This conversation is over," he said, his voice cold. "Everyone out. I need to call my attorneys." He stormed from the room, slamming the study door behind him. The dining room lay in ruins, china smeared with gravy, candles guttering, half-eaten pie congealing in the cold air. The feast that was supposed to cement his triumph had dissolved into ashes. I stood among it all, steady, unshaken. For years I had dreamed of this moment, imagined it as victory. But as I looked around at my fractured family, I felt no triumph, only the heavy weight of inevitability. The storm had broken, and nothing would ever be the same. The house did not sleep that night. From my old bedroom, still papered with relics of the girl I once was, I could hear the storm raging below. My father's voice thundered through the floorboards, muffled but furious, barking at attorneys over the phone. My mother's softer tones tried, as always, to soothe, though her words blurred into background noise. Occasionally, Bennett's roar joined the chorus, slurred with drink, followed by Sloane's dramatic wailing. I sat at my childhood desk, running my hand over the dusty surface where I had once sketched out my first algorithms in neat blue pen. A decade ago, I had dreamed of revolutionizing crossport from this very spot. Now, I had outgrown both the desk and the house it sat in. A knock shattered the silence. When I opened the door, Bennett barged past me without waiting for permission. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot, his movements erratic. "We need to talk," he snapped, pacing the room like a trapped bull. "About what?" I asked evenly, shutting the door behind him. "How you ran the company into the ground, or how you plan to inherit what you never earned." "You think you're clever," he spat, his face contorting. "Little Elena, the ghost in the wires. Lying to us for years. You enjoyed it, didn't you? Watching us stumble while you sat smug in Savannah? Enjoyed?" I let out a cold laugh. Do you remember 6 years ago, when I suggested Crossport migrate to cloud-based systems over Christmas dinner? Dad dismissed it as a fad, but 3 months later, you pitched the same idea as your own visionary insight. Don't talk to me about lies, Bennett. You've been stealing from me all along. His eyes darkened. I was the one who stayed. While you ran away to play rebel, I kept Crossport afloat. You didn't keep it afloat, I said sharply. You siphoned it dry, Mariner Tide Consulting. I have the transaction records, the offshore accounts, the fake invoices, all of it routed through your office computer. Do you want me to show you the evidence? His breath came ragged, his fists clenching at his sides. You wouldn't dare. I don't need to, I replied. The board will see it soon enough. The only reason you're not facing handcuffs tonight is because I don't want the scandal to damage the company's value during transition. But don't mistake restraint for mercy. Push me, and I will bury you. For the first time, fear flickered across his features. Then anger consumed it. He stepped toward me, voice low and venomous. You'd destroy your own brother. I'd hold a thief accountable, I corrected, refusing to back away. Even if that thief shares my blood. We locked eyes, the space between us crackling. Then, with a growl of frustration, he stormed to the door. This isn't over, he warned. Yes, Bennett, I said softly to his retreating back. It island. The door slammed, rattling the frames of my old science fair ribbons. I exhaled slowly, my hands steady despite the storm still pounding in my chest. Moments later, another knock came. This one tentative, hesitant. I opened the door to find Sloane, her makeup touched up, though her eyes were still red from crying. She slipped inside without waiting for an invitation and perched on the edge of my bed. So, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, you're secretly rich. That's badass. I raised an eyebrow. That's quite the turnaround from an hour ago when you were sobbing into your live stream. She shrugged, flashing a smile too practiced to be genuine. I'm adaptable. It's essential for influencer longevity. But really, Elena, think about it, what we could do together. You as the brilliant CEO, me as the relatable, glamorous sister. A family redemption arc. Just like I said earlier. People would eat it up. I studied her. So this is a business pitch? More like an alliance. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming. You need a human face. Investors love a story. I can give you that. Authentic content, curated narratives, partnerships you can't buy. Think of me as your brand ambassador. I let out a slow breath, half exasperated, half amused. The brand ambassador of a middleware platform? Sloane, do you even know what the company does? She wrinkled her nose. Not exactly. But I know what people want to hear, and I know how to make them listen. Don't dismiss me, Elena. I built my platform from nothing, too, just like you. The parallel was jarring. Different as night and day, yet she wasn't wrong. We had both clawed something out of neglect, mine from silence, hers from spectacle. I'll think about it, I said at last. She smiled, satisfied. Good. Because I've already hinted on Instagram about a family business shakeup. My engagement is through the roof. I closed my eyes briefly, pinching the bridge of my nose. Of course she had. After she left, the room was quiet again. I returned to my desk, powering up my laptop. Contracts, press releases, financials, everything was ready for morning. Yet I couldn't shake the image of Celeste's hand on mine, her whispered regret, or Victor's ultimatum echoing in my ears. Be my daughter, or the woman who took my company. I had chosen both. The hours dragged toward dawn, heavy with the ghosts of everything unsaid. My laptop screen glowed in the dim light of my childhood bedroom, documents open and ready, the press release timed for 9 a.m. Sharp. Every line of text was a weapon forged from a decade of silence, and yet, staring at it, I felt not triumph, but a gnawing hollowness. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. This time, it was my mother. She slipped inside quietly, wearing a cashmere sweater and slacks instead of her dinner gown, her usual armor of Charleston elegance stripped away. She looked older in that moment, fragile, though her eyes were sharper than I'd seen in years. "Your father has locked himself in the study with a bottle of scotch," she said, settling into the window seat where she used to read me bedtime stories. "He's convinced there's some loophole to stop the sale." "There isn't," I replied, swiveling my chair toward her. "The attorneys confirmed it. The board voted. It's done." She nodded slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "You know, I kept your room exactly as you left it. Part of me thought you'd come back once this rebellion ran its course." "It was never rebellion," I said, my voice low but firm. "It was survival." Her gaze softened. 200 million? That's what they're saying your company is worth?" "Yes," I said simply. She let out a faint, incredulous laugh. "And all those years you told us you couldn't afford plane tickets home." "I needed you to underestimate me," I admitted. "It was the only way to keep building without interference." For a long moment, she was silent, her eyes tracing the outlines of my old trophies, my faded college pennant. When she spoke again, her voice was unsteady. "I knew, Elena. Not the details, not the scale, but I knew you were different. Special. I just didn't know how to fight for you in a family like ours. With a man like your father." Her confession pierced deeper than any of Victor's dismissals ever had. "You could have spoken," I whispered, old pain flaring sharp. "When he humiliated me, when he laughed at me in front of the board, just once, you could have stood beside me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was weak. I told myself I was keeping the peace. But I failed you. I failed as a mother when you needed me most." I hadn't expected this remorse. I had come prepared for anger, for manipulation, for wine-soaked platitudes. Not this. It disarmed me more than fury ever could. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "Tomorrow the acquisition becomes public," I said. "Crossport will be folded into Aurelia. The name may remain for now, but everything else will change. Dad and Bennett will be offered advisory roles, titles without teeth, for appearances. And you?" "I'll stay in Savannah. We'll install a new team here. I've outgrown Charleston." She nodded, understanding without argument. Then, almost in a whisper, "Your father may never forgive you." "I don't need forgiveness," I said. "I need to be seen." She studied me for a long time, then stood. Before she left, she paused by the door. "Your grandfather left something for you. A letter. I should have given it years ago, but I was afraid. I'll find it." And then she was gone, leaving me alone with the hum of my laptop and the echo of her regret. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I was dressed in a charcoal Armani suit, hair swept into a sleek chignon. I looked every inch the CEO, every inch the woman Victor had sworn I could never be. Downstairs, the house was eerily quiet. Maria, the longtime housekeeper, handed me coffee without a word, her eyes warm with unspoken solidarity. At 7, Victor appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. He looked older than he had the night before, shoulders stooped, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "My study, now," he said, his voice stripped of its usual thunder. I followed him down the hall, past portraits of cross ancestors glaring down in judgment. The study smelled of leather and stale whiskey. He took his seat behind the desk, but I didn't sit across from him as expected. Instead, I perched on the desk itself, forcing him to look up at me. "My attorneys confirm what you said," he began stiffly. "The sale is binding. The board voted. You've cornered me." I met his gaze. "I didn't corner you, Dad. You left yourself no other path." His lips thinned. 50 million. 2 years ago, this company was valued at 70. You've gutted us." "No," I said evenly. "The market did. I offered more than anyone else would. Others would have stripped the assets and buried the cross name entirely. I won't." For the first time, uncertainty crossed his features. "What exactly are your plans?" I had waited a decade to hear those words. Crossport will become Aurelia's enterprise division. Legacy systems modernized, cloud integrations implemented, new partnerships built, 60% of staff retained. Upper management, however, will be restructured. I paused. Randall is finished. Bennett too, unless he proves himself. Sloan might stay if she's willing to actually work. Victor's eyes narrowed. And me? You'll be offered chairman emeritus. No authority, but an office. A respected figurehead, if you want it. His jaw tightened, a vein twitching in his temple. A ceremonial role, you reduce me to a relic. A dignified advisory position, I countered. With benefits and compensation, the choice is yours. He stood abruptly, turning to the window where the garden stretched toward the marsh. His shoulders sagged under the weight of years. How? He asked finally, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. How did you do it? With nothing, no connections, no capital. How? I hesitated, then spoke the truth. With education, with grit, with nights spent coding until my fingers cramped and mornings spent hustling contracts, with sacrifice, and with the knowledge that proving you wrong was the only fuel I needed. He turned, his eyes glistening with something dangerously close to admiration. I expected you to fail. You weren't wrong, I said. 90% of startups do, but you didn't protect me by denying me the chance. You just proved you never believed in me. For once, he had no retort. Victor sank back into his chair, the leather groaning beneath him. For a moment, he looked smaller, older, as though the walls of his empire were closing in on him. He rubbed his temples, then muttered, I thought I was sparing you. Better disappointment at my hand than humiliation in the marketplace. I shook my head. That wasn't protection, Dad. That was control. And it cost you more than you'll ever admit. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Silence stretched between us, weighted with years of missed chances. Finally, I laid the final card on the table. Bennett has been embezzling. Nearly $300,000 siphoned through Mariner Tide Consulting. Offshore accounts, phantom invoices. I have the records. Victor's head snapped up. That's not possible. It's fact, I said. Sports betting debts, mostly. He and Randall worked together. Randall buried audits to cover his trail. I moved when I did, because if I'd waited another year, there'd be nothing left to buy. His face drained of color. For once, the Titan of Charleston looked stunned, broken. Why would he steal? He's had every advantage salary, trust fund. Because you never taught him what enough looked like, I said. My words cut sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. Victor leaned back, staring at the ceiling as though it might offer answers. His voice, when it came, was low. So both my son and my company were failing, and I too blind to see. Not blind, I said quietly. Just looking the wrong way. He pressed his palms against the desk, trying to anchor himself. What happens to him now? He has a choice. Repay the stolen funds and resign, or face charges. If he wants a future in this business, he'll need to earn it an MBA, restitution, proof he can stand without your shadow. And Randall? He's finished. I'll accept his quiet resignation. If he resists, I'll hand the evidence to regulators. His career is over either way. Victor's lips thinned into a grim line, but he didn't argue. For the first time, his eyes held no arrogance, no dismissal, only something raw and startling. Curiosity. And you? How did you build it, Elena? Truly? No investors who knew our name. No cross connections. How? I hesitated. The part of me still hardened by years of rejection wanted to brush him off, let him drown in ignorance. But another part, the child who once longed for his approval, wanted him to understand. I started small, I said. Freelance jobs, long nights. I built a relay engine that solved the biggest pain point in logistics, making ancient systems talk to modern ones. It was the same idea you laughed at in that boardroom 10 years ago. I refined it, Sold it, reinvested every cent, ate noodles for 3 years straight, slept on a mattress on the floor. I built a team who believed in me, because I had to. Being underestimated made me invisible, and that invisibility became my greatest advantage. No one saw me coming. For a heartbeat, silence again. Then, almost imperceptibly, his lips curved. Not into mockery, into something I hadn't seen since I was a child. Pride. "You outmaneuvered me completely," he said, voice rough. "Your grandfather, he would have admired this." The words lodged in my chest, tangled with every scar he'd given me. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but recognition. And that, for the first time, was enough. He extended his hand across the desk. It trembled faintly. Chairman Emeritus, then. I looked at his hand, then placed mine in his. His grip was firm, still commanding, but I felt the shift. We were no longer father and overlooked daughter. We were adversaries turned reluctant equals. "Welcome to Aurelia, Dad," I said softly. 6 months later, I stood in the atrium of what had once been Crossport's headquarters. The brass nameplate on the building now read Harbor Light Technologies, a merger of past and present Crossport's legacy integrated into Aurelia's vision. The space had been transformed. Dark wood panels replaced with glass, cubicles torn down for open collaboration floors, servers humming with cloud, native platforms where once outdated terminals had wheezed. Employees bustled through the lobby, some wary, most cautiously hopeful. They had survived the transition because they were adaptable, loyal, and talented. The dead weight, the complacent executives, Randall's cronies, were gone. Victor had surprised everyone. Though stripped of power, he had taken the title of Chairman Emeritus with unexpected grace. He no longer bellowed orders, but instead told stories. About the early days with my grandfather, about the first dockworker they digitized, about the mistakes and lessons of decades past. Once a week, he met with young engineers and project managers, offering context, history, and advice. It was the first time in years he had been listened to, not out of obligation but genuine respect. Bennett's fate had been harsher. When confronted with the evidence, he had raged, threatened lawsuits, and even accused me of fabricating records. But in the end, faced with the undeniable truth, he accepted the terms: repay the embezzled funds, resign quietly, and enroll in an MBA program if he wanted any hope of returning. To my surprise, he chose school over exile. His phone calls came sporadically, usually late at night, asking halting questions about case studies. For the first time in his life, he was learning to earn something. Sloane, on the other hand, flourished. I had been skeptical of her proposal, but she proved unexpectedly useful. As Harbor Light's brand ambassador, she reframed the narrative. Not scandal, not betrayal, but rebirth. She told the story of a family legacy, evolving, of a daughter stepping into her grandfather's footsteps, of Charleston tradition meeting innovation. Her 500,000 followers devoured it. Overnight, Harbor Light's image shifted from a crumbling relic to a bold reinvention, and my mother Celeste changed most of all. With the company no longer a battlefield, she no longer drowned herself in Chardonnay. She joined the board of a women's tech incubator, lending her poise and connections to help other young founders. One evening, she told me quietly, "I want to be the advocate for them that I failed to be for you." The numbers spoke for themselves. Client retention soared to 98%. New contracts pushed revenue up by 32%. Dock workers, once terrified of losing their jobs, now trained as system testers and support staff. Harbor Light wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. But numbers weren't the real victory. The real victory came one late evening when I sat with Victor in the conference room, reviewing quarterly reports. He tapped the spreadsheet, his finger pausing on the profit margin. "You've already achieved more in 6 months than I did in my first decade," he said quietly, almost to himself. I looked up, startled. He wasn't mocking. He wasn't condescending. He was acknowledging. Something long frozen inside me cracked open. It wasn't vindication, I no longer needed that. It was recognition. The thing I had chased all my life, dressed in the simple truth of his words. In that moment, I realized success alone would never have been enough. Winning the company, building the empire that had filled the hollow space for a time. But it was only when recognition came, when honesty replaced silence, that the wound began to heal. As Thanksgiving approached again, we planned something different. No grand dining hall, no competitive toasts, no performance for outsiders. Just a small table, set simply, where everyone spoke and everyone listened. Even Maria, our longtime housekeeper, joined us at the table for the first time in decades. There were no ultimatums that night, no slammed fists or slammed doors, only cautious laughter, tentative conversation, the fragile beginnings of something like family. For the first time I felt whole, not because I had proved myself, not because I had conquered, but because, finally, we were trying to see one another clearly. And so, for anyone who has lived inside the shadow of a family business, who has been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, I hope my story reaches you. Build your own success, forge your own path. But remember, revenge, no matter how sweet, is hollow without reconciliation. Comment below and share your story. Have you been silenced in your family's business? How did you find your voice? Like, subscribe, and pass this along if it resonates. Because the true measure of success isn't just what you build alone, it's what you create together.